Well, hey there, you're on the internet, I have some free time, and welcome to the Triple N Network, where all you newbie nib nerds can find all the news you'll need. Let's look at an ink today, shall we? Now, today's ink is one of the few that I still have in not sample form. It's actually an old favorite. It's by Private Reserve. Avacado. Not avocado. Avacado. It's a dark, rich green. As you can see, I've used most of the packet, and I think this is actually my second packet of this. It does kind of evoke avocado, but maybe that's why it's avocado, because it's not quite. Does kind of remind one of it. Now all the tests were done in this Knox Galileo with a fine nib, and this Kaweco Sport with a broad nib, and it is still in here because I love this ink. It's wonderfully rich and dark and etc, etc, etc. Now, Private Reserve is known for having very saturated inks, which means that sort of the, I guess, to simplify it, the ratio of like water to actual ink components within the ink is more dense. You know, there's the ratio of water is a bit smaller than average, so it's a bit, there's more to it, which is, I think, partly why these inks tend to sheen so much, because there's sort of more left sitting on top of the page once the liquid sinks in. But yeah, anyways, here's chromatography if the camera will ever focus. Now here's where it looks like an avocado, because here you see sort of this yellow going into sort of more of a bright green at parts, and then the very dark, almost black at the edges. That kind of reminds me of when you cut into an avocado. Like the pit would be right about here. But yeah, as you can see, not an abundance of water resistance. And when you look at the dried version, it really is just exactly the same. You can barely even tell where the initial drop was placed. I mean, it's barest hint of it right there, but yeah. Thought I'd compare it to some other sort of like rich and yet vibrant greens. Here's avocado up at the top. Here's Grafon Faber-Castell's moss green, Noodler's green marine, and Noodler's forest green. Now, I don't know how clearly this is going to come out on camera, but there's definitely more yellow in this. You know, it's almost more of a, I don't know, it really is more of an avocado-y color. These are sort of more of a standard green. Moving on, top down in density, Clairefontaine 90 grams per square meter. I'm going to try and hold this real still so you can just see. Look at that wonderful shading. I mean, it really is this dark, rich green, and yet it kind of has this hints of vibrancy throughout. I mean, it's just really beautiful to write with. Now, the fine took 12 seconds. The broad took 16. I said the flow was just barely on the side of you know, like easy. You know, I say a 5.5 is steady. 4.5 is when it's just a little bit reticent, you know, where you kind of have to like tap the nib a bit more before you start writing. But this, considering how dense this ink is, you know, how very saturated it is, it's not thick, but it is saturated. I kind of like that it was just over the side to just, like, you didn't have to overly encourage it. But yeah, it's just, I mean, isn't it gorgeous? There's no bleed, no feather, no spread, no sheen. And as you can see, not a lot of water resistance. And as the chromatography kind of implied, there was a lot that was going to wash away, so it does make a bit of a mess. That would be very difficult to recover. Next is Rhodia, 80 grams per square meter. And as I might have mentioned in a couple of previous videos, I have this problem where sometimes the bottom couple pages in a pad of, and it doesn't matter, it's happened with Rhodia, it's happened with Clairefontaine. They sort of tend to go down in quality. It's like maybe the last 5 pages, which I believe this is from, which is why we have this very unusual little bit of bleed in a couple places. Because, I mean, like I said, I love this ink, and I mean, you know me, I love Rhodia, and I've never seen this behavior before, except in those last few pages. But even still, except for that little bit of bleed, I mean, look at that color. Isn't that just gorgeous? Fine took 10 seconds, the broad took 14. And I know I'm not going to be able to get it on camera, but there are just like the tiniest little halos of this red-black sheen. Anyways, Yeah, no bleed, no feather, no spread, except for those random bits, so I guess I should say no feather, no spread. Did make a bit of a mess. That's really gone. For some reason it did kind of explode a bit there. Not easy to recover. Next is Tomoe River Paper, where I feel like here you get even more, I don't know, intense shading. The fine took 19 seconds, the broad took 24, which, I don't know, I feel like is a logical conclusion. This is a very saturated ink. The fine is just a bit wet, and this is such hydrophobic paper, but yeah, hopefully I'll be able to get some of the sheen on camera. Do you see that? Sort of the shiny red-black sheen and the halos. It's throughout, but the scrubby is always the easiest place to find it. But yeah, so there's that. If you lay it on really thick on this paper, you will get some of that sheen. But yeah, I said show through might be a bit of an issue because this is a very dark green ink, so something to be aware of. And as Tomoe River tends to do, when you add more water, it all just goes away. So definitely not easy to recover, if recoverable at all. Don't expect much. World's worst 20-pound copier paper, where the fine took 3 seconds to dry and the broad took 2, and I cannot explain that with logic. But there you go. So I said there was not as much bleed through as I would have expected, which is true, because I mean, like, that's really not so bad. I mean, for a wet fine and a broad nib and such a saturated ink, that's really not too bad. But yeah, there's no real shading here. It really is just like a straight green and, you know, kind of like somewhere between a medium and a very dark green. It's still a very pleasant color. There are some like little bits of feathering. It's not obvious. Like if you look at the F in feather. See how it's, yeah, so, but again, because the paper is so absorbent, more of the ink got trapped in there and was harder to wash out. However, it did feather and explode and was not great. Next is Mead Notebook Paper, which took 3.5 seconds to dry. And I just used the fine on this one, the Galileo fine. And again, since it is slightly wet and this is a very saturated ink, there is a bit of very near bleed through and very significant echo. But yeah, the color is still vibrant. Again, because it's more absorbent, more of it was able to remain, though it did feather and explode. Maybe if you had to, you could recover that. It would not be the easiest thing in the world. And last is Moleskine Notebook Paper, where again, I just used the fine. And this is normal Moleskine paper. This isn't that freakishly well-behaved stuff, which you can kind of see. I mean, it's not the worst behavior. I mean, you get shading, and it's not awful, but I mean, if you look at the first A in Avacado, you can see some of that feathering. There is the M in my, the first L in all. It's not overpowering, but it is noticeable, and it is all throughout. It took 6 seconds to dry, which kind of confused me because this is very absorbent paper. Now, for a fine nib, I would like to see better on this paper, but at this point, I know what I'm getting into with Moleskine. It's a mess. But yeah. I mean, could have been a lot worse. Maybe a very dry writing extra fine. Maybe. I don't know. Yeah, that's a mess. You're not getting that back. I mean, look, the feathering, explodingness, just, it overlapped. That doesn't even look like English anymore, so. There you go. There's Private Reserve's Avacado. It's a wonderful green. It's somehow both dark and rich and yet vibrant. It's fairly well behaved, very saturated. If you really lay it on thick on nice papers, you get this sort of nice red-black sheen. Just don't get it wet. For your consideration from the Triple N Network, if you liked the video, please give it a thumbs up. If you'd like to see more, please subscribe to the channel. And if you'd like to vote on what inks I should review next, please go over to my video called Apology Announcement Invitation and let me know. Thanks for watching. Bye.